Hello there, and welcome to the English Language Club. It's another Tuesday, so another time to hang out with our wonderful students. I am Colin Munro, and this is Tony Cooper. Tony, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Great to be here.
Great. So we've got a few people on the stream already. A few regulars: Mudassir, Lolly Lolly, number one. Hello to you all. So, how are you all doing? We've not got many questions in so far, although we have got a couple of interesting ones. But so keep some more questions.
Yes.
Keep some more questions coming, yeah, let's get started, I suppose. But yeah, keep the questions coming in.
Yeah.
So
Say hi to Fakabir Amin and Guga. Hello to both of you. Welcome.
hello, yeah. Mudassir started us off. He says, yeah, if someone's age is equal to mine, then can I say he is my age or he is of my age? Or are there any other ways of saying that? So he is my age would be sort of the main one, I think. That's the main way I would
Yes.
express that. He's my age. Or you could say he's the
Yes.
same age as me. But he is of my age. That's
So there's an idiom of an age with, which means the same age. So you can say he and of an age, or those two boys are of an age, or he's of an age of my son when like whatever. But it's an idiom, and it's not necessarily super common. It's definitely not one of the main ways to say that two things are the same age.
yeah,
But he is my age or we are the same age would definitely be your two main ways of saying that.
yeah. But so are
We
we
don't
saying that he is
usually use
of my age is not right?
No, we don't usually use
No.
of with age.
Yeah, I mean I
Like
definitely
in some
understand that
languages you always use have or of with age, but in English we just use be
yeah,
is with
yeah,
age.
because it's almost like it's an adjective. Your age, well, is it not?
It's a status,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
what it
yeah.
is.
Which is
It's a state of being.
yeah,
In English it's considered to be a state of being. Yeah.
yeah. So it's like saying me saying I am 41 is the same as me saying, well, grammatically, it's saying I am happy. No, because that's an adjective.
Yes.
Or yeah, it's a status, but it's an adjective as well. Yeah,
Or I'm sick, or anything that could be. I mean, whether it's a an adjective in this case or a noun doesn't really matter.
because it's
Like I am a nurse is the same thing, right? It's something about you that we use be for. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
A
Great.
potentially
Okay.
changeable status.
Yeah. Okay. Mudassir, I hope that is helpful. Let us know if you have any follow-up questions, because we've still not got many questions here. But we have got one here from number one, and Lolly Lolly's also added to it. So number one says, "Hi sir, how to use? Better to say, how do you use? Although, even though, despite, and nevertheless in sentences." And Lolly Lolly adds to this, thus, therefore, and consequently. I'm a little confused with these words. Could you please explain? So these two questions are very, very similar.
Yes.
So what are these words? Although, even though, despite, nevertheless. These are types of conjunctions, right?
Yes, these are conjunctions. The technical is subordinating conjunctions. We generally think of conjunctions as like and, but, or, and these, pair things equally. But although, despite, consequently, these are they're called subordinating conjunctions because they make one sentence kind of connect to another sentence and they need it. So you can use these either before a sentence or like at the beginning of a sentence or in the middle of a sentence to separate two different parts that could be their own sentence. And it makes them kind of connected to each other so that they can't be separate sentences. So we might say, we are going to go to the park even though it is raining, right?
Yeah.
So we are going to go to the park could be a sentence. It is raining could be a sentence. And if we combine them with and or but, then it's fine. We could still separate them out. But if we combine them with even though, then they can't be separated anymore. Neither of them are the even though it is raining wouldn't be a sentence on its own.
No, because you would need the clause beforehand. Yeah.
Exactly.
We went to the
Yes.
park even though it was raining.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can also switch it around so that the part that has the like although or something like that is at the beginning. So you could say although it is raining, comma, we are going to the park or we are still going to the park. And so yeah, that's it. These are used to show that something is happening contrary to what you would expect. So
Yeah.
despite the rain, we went to the park, or we went to the park despite the rain, we went, or it was raining outside. Nevertheless, we went to the park. Right. So that's what these are used for, is to show that something is happening contrary to your expectations. Although, even though, despite, and nevertheless. There
Hmm.
are many others of these kind of subordinating conjunctions. Um, and Lolly Lolly brings up another category of these, which is the ones that show that something is happening as you would expect, thus and therefore and consequently, right? Like you could, if it's something is happening that you would expect, you could say it's raining, therefore we stayed inside,
Hmm.
right? That's what you would use therefore instead of like although or even though.
Yeah. And yeah, consequently being this is the reason why. Uh,
Mhm.
or yeah. Yeah, so it is funny though. I'm just looking at those words, although, even though, despite, and nevertheless, and I was trying to switch them in and out of sentences, and to see if any of them, to think if any of them have the same meaning, and they don't. They are all different. They all do refer to a different relationship between those two clauses, and is that's the tricky part with these is
Yes.
understanding, you know, what relationship do these two clauses have given each word, and that
Yes.
so should we just quickly go through that? So if I say I'm happy although I have bad days, uh, that means you're you're stating something, but then you you use although
You're
to
stating an exception.
yeah.
Really. So that's what all like what we was saying about the rain is like you would expect after the one statement you would expect something from that. And so by using although you're saying, well, but that's not entirely true. Here's an exception to what you would normally expect.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, even though, that's when, again, something is contrary to what you'd expect, but it's. How is that different? I can't. I've struggled to explain that.
So again, I think that the tricky part here is that this happens a lot in English where you have words that are extremely similar in terms of what they do, especially
Yeah.
grammatically. They serve the same purpose. Basically, all of these could be replaced with the word
Hmm.
but these have a little bit more, they give you a little bit more nuance, a little bit more information. So often in English, when you get all these words that, like when we talked about beneath, under, below, underneath, beneath, a lot of times the only difference is that they entered the language at different times, and so they slowly collected different collocations, different common times or situations where they would be used. But the actual difference between them is very, very slight.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Even though and despite mean that you're saying that what was happening specifically caused or would have specifically caused you not to do something. Like we went outside despite the rain means that the rain should have caused us not to go outside, but we did it anyway.
Yeah.
Although doesn't mean that it's necessarily exact, like that's not causing it. For instance, you could say, we usually go to the park on Sunday, but this week we went on uh, Wednesday, although we usually go on Sunday. The fact that it was Wednesday isn't specifically making you
Hmm.
not go to the park.
Hmm.
You're just saying this is an exception from the normal.
Yeah.
And the nevertheless is used. It can mean either. It used to mean only the like indirect, like despite, but it has changed somewhat in its usage. But nevertheless is also very kind of more formal or poetic. It's not as commonly used.
Mm.
Um, so it's often hard to really pin down differences between words like this
Yeah.
because it's really going to depend on how it's
And on
used.
context, it could be slightly different.
Exactly, on the
Yeah.
context. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well.
Thus, therefore, and consequently are a little bit easier to tell the difference between because they all go into a sentence in a little bit of a different way. Thus is just another word of saying a way of saying so. So it can be used in a lot of different ways.
And that's either
Therefore,
quite formal or maybe antiquated a little bit. Um,
thus
uh,
is technically antiquated, and so instead, but rather than being antiquated, it has taken on its own meaning.
yeah.
So it's a way of sounding um, uh, more formal. It's
Formal
often
or
used a lot of
dramatic.
times in like logical
Yeah. Yeah.
discussions
Yeah.
about things, specifically to sound. It's like saying QED. It's something that makes you sound like you're using the terminology. Therefore is a little bit less informal, but it's actually therefore is kind of really tricky to throw into a sentence. Most of the time, I recommend students not to use the word therefore unless they have had quite a bit of practice with it because
Mm.
as having been an English teacher in the past who's been grading papers, 90% of the time when people use the word therefore, they use it incorrectly. And what it does is it kind of destroys people's sentences. It makes them use improper grammar in their sentences.
Mm.
So it's a little bit more difficult to use, but in spoken conversation, it's less formal than thus.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. We've had a couple of other people join us. We've got Mina Yasmina from Algeria. Uh,
Well,
so yeah, hello to you. You're very welcome here. I don't think I've seen you before, so yes, you're very welcome. Dev is here and he's got a question. We'll come back to that. Laxmi from Nepal, hello there, and
welcome.
and Ahmed has also got a question. So we'll get on to that. And Frank, hi teachers. Yes, hi Frank. How are you?
Welcome.
Yeah, so keep those questions coming in. We'll go back to Dev's question. He says, "Hi guys, I have a question about the preposition to. Normally, this preposition is pronounced ta, or yeah, t, before consonants and to before vowels. So in sentences like I have to do, to is not stressed.
So
There's no rule about this.
technically in English,
You can all.
sorry,
I
say
was
again?
just going to say this. It's not really a rule about this. You can always say it. It's like contractions. You know, it's never wrong to say the full thing. So I would say the sort of base form correct pronunciation is to, and that's always
Yes.
correct. That's not to say there's not other ways that are correct. Um,
Right.
but yeah, often it gets reduced depending on
Mhm.
how fast you're speaking and on what words are either side of
Yes.
it. But yeah, we do often say
So
to.
yes, and this is related to when we were talking about the like, do you pronounce better or
Mm,
better or better? And I think the degree for different ones of these like alternate pronunciations have different degrees of acceptance. For instance, the and the.
yeah.
There isn't a hard and fast rule of when you say the or when you say
No.
the. It's about how it fits into the
Yeah.
sentence. The same is the case for to. Whether you say to or ta, or to or ta or to, um, really depends. Like there's not a hard and fast rule, though. What you're saying is a good that's a good observational rule of like when this happens. But the reality is it's not quite that solid. What actually you're referring to is weakly stressed words, often or syllables or sounds kind of slide in pronunciations. English does not really technically have unstressed words. A word that is only one syllable technically just has that syllable stressed, but there are some exceptions to that, which is where usually a really short word comes right before. The typical unstressed word that you would see would be Oftentimes you see, a plane pronounced as if the was just part of the word after it. So to do, um, there is no real sense where to is not stressed. However, there is also a word to do, which means, the things that you have that you need to do. Um, and so oftentimes you'll hear people say to do as if it were one word, because sometimes it is, but they'll often use it as one word even when it isn't. So there isn't really a technical a rule here that where to is not stressed. This is just something that it's a shortcut that people are often taking. Yeah.
Yeah. So Dev, I would say to you, yeah, there is no rule really about this.
Yes.
But remember that the reason that this is sometimes pronounced in a sort of softer way, the reason we say I want to go instead of I want to go sometimes, is that it's easier to say. So when you can, so you just think about that when you're trying to figure out how to pronounce things, and that's probably going to be right. I think maybe you're overthinking things, always trying to think of a rule for something, when a lot of the time it's just what is easiest to say. In fact, that reminds me of the ed on the end of verbs. Think. No, hang on. What am I not think? Love.
Walk, love.
Yeah. So there's three ways to pronounce it, and it's never ed, like you would think.
Yeah.
So how do you know? Well, it's always just whatever's easiest physically.
Yes.
And so I think so going ooh sometimes instead is just a bit more difficult. So I think English has evolved through laziness a little bit.
Well, very much so, or efficiency.
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. Well, there's a fine line between those two things, I think.
Exactly. Well, one thing that I think also muddies the waters is the schwa, the half vowel sound.
Yeah.
In a lot of these situations, it's not that we're pronouncing, to ta. We're pronouncing it ta, as in ti schwa. And it's an extremely short, brief sound. And so what happens is that sound often is going to just blend into whatever you're going to say next, whether it's the next letter or the next word. Some languages, most famously Russian, have letters that all they do is change the way the letters around them are pronounced. English doesn't technically have that, though we do, like H, right? Like one of its most common purposes is to change a T into a C to a ch, an S to a sh, so on. So informally, we kind of do have these, and the schwa is one of them. It causes whatever's after it to be kind of pronounced more mushy, right? So when you're pronouncing the to in its shorter pronunciation, like T schwa, it's going to kind of blend in with whatever's after it. When you're pronouncing the E in an ED with its like shortest pronunciation, it's going to modify the way you pronounce that final consonant sound to make it mushier, like softer, and easier to blend in with whatever comes after.
Yeah. Okay.
And that can be a very complicated concept, and that's why I really like the way Colin puts it, that pronounce it the way it's easiest to pronounce, because that's the way it works.
Yeah. That's the reason there's differences. There's no rule. It's just what rolls off the tongue is what's best. Yeah. So I hope that's helpful. So let's see. We got Ahmed's got a question. Hi guys. So apprehensive means afraid, but apprehension means to understand. Why does the meaning change with the prefix iv or ion here? Oh, Tony's rubbing his hands together. I think he likes the sound of this question. So go ahead.
So it doesn't. Both apprehensive and apprehension can refer to learning or fear. And that's because the word apprehend, that is the root of these, means to take or to seize.
Yeah.
And so you can be seized by fear, right?
Hmm.
Or you can seize something, which means to learn it, to understand it,
Yeah.
right? So really, what determines what this word means is whether it is an active or passive. Whether if you are doing it, if you are apprehending, your apprehension, then it is about learning. If it's passive, it's something that's happening to you, then it's fear. Now that gets kind of blended, so it winds up meaning, depending on totally on context, it means either fear or understanding, learning, and this is not uncommon in English, for a word to mean two completely opposite things. Uh, One of
Yeah.
the classic example I like to talk about is the word ginger, as a kind of an adjective.
Okay.
Ginger, or ginger as an adverb is more common. Like if you do something gingerly, or use an older phrase was with ginger, or like you take ginger steps or something like that. It means to be quiet and not to be noticed. But
Mm.
a ginger is like someone with red hair.
Yeah.
Someone who has a ginger personality is like really intense. And in fact, the word, the spice ginger is kind of named after this idea that it gets your attention. So the word
Mm.
ginger, to avoid attention and to get attention, because the same word comes into English from two different other languages, where it completely has opposite meanings, and English has kind of merged it so it sounds the same. It's the same word, but it means two completely different things, completely opposite things. The same is the case for apprehensive. Um, Another one is nonplussed, which both means to not react and to react. It, yeah. So this happens a lot in English.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. It's. So it's difficult. So good question. Good question. And I can understand why you were confused by that, because I'm still confused by that, to be honest.
But the suffix did not change it. The word itself
Yeah.
can mean either of those two things.
Mm.
In the same way that a tank can be an army vehicle or something that you fill with gas, right? Words in English frequently have more than one meaning. Um, and so you can only know which meaning it refers to by looking at the context. So this is not uncommon in English. So it's not that anything is happening with the suffix there. Apprehensive rarely refers to learning, but it can. And an apprehension, I would say both of these words mean fear much more often than they mean understanding, right? You're teaching to try to get someone to apprehend, or you're teaching for apprehension.
Yeah.
Um, but most of the time, your apprehensions are things that you're afraid of,
Hmm.
right?
Speaking of tanks, do you know why? I'm sure you do, Tony. But for the interest of other people, uh, do you know why the army vehicles are called tanks? Do you know, Tony? You
Um,
must know this.
Not off the top
Do
of
you
my head.
not?
I
It
don't
goes
recall.
back to the First
I
World
can't
War.
recall it off
It
the top
goes
of my
back to
head.
the First World War when they were first used,
Hmm.
and they were transporting them on a train, and they didn't want, if the train was captured, or no, it was to do with like the paperwork. Because they were top secret weapons. They didn't want people to know what they were, so they, on the sort of inventory, they just wrote tanks because they wanted to pretend they were just water tanks or something that no one would be interested
Right.
in. So, and then they ended up just getting called tanks because
Yes, I remember. I think it was their military code word. I
yeah,
don't think it had anything to do with necessarily trains or transportation. Yeah.
no, I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
it was. It
exactly.
was, but anyway, yeah. So that's yeah, funny way that things get
Yeah, that's pretty
get get
cool. Yeah.
get
Yeah.
named.
I had
Yeah,
heard that before.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So number one says, "Thanks." Thank you. Explained so the easiest way. I saw a lot of YouTube videos. However, I was still confused. Okay, that's good, referring to or the previous question about all those. So great. I'm glad that was helpful. That's what we're here for. So keep those questions coming in. Um, Laxmi says, "I cannot speak English properly, so I want to learn." Well, great. I mean, there's no easy answer. I often see adverts and things on YouTube videos, and they're saying here's this special new method of how you can learn a language in 3 months or a short amount of time, or suddenly they found a new system in which the best way to learn English, and it's all rubbish. It's all not true. It's not easy to learn another language. It does take a lot of hard work, and there is no one method that is the best. At least not for everyone. Every person learns in their own individual way and at their own individual speed. So you just have to keep at it. That's the best advice I can give you. But coming here, participating in the live streams, is a great one of many great ways that you can improve your English. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being here, and I hope we can be helpful to you as you learn. So Fakabir says, glad to see you live streaming. I follow you for phonetics and jumped into the stream. Yeah, great. So yeah, we've been doing these live streams for quite a long. Well, I mean, not
quite a while now.
Super long time, but a
few months.
Yeah, a few months. And it all got started kind of because of lockdown and the situation that the world is in. That sort of inspired me to kind of get the channel going again and get some more content out there. And I got Tony to help me do that, so he kindly volunteered, and I don't think he knew what he was getting into at the time, but yeah, here we are a few months later, and we've been doing it every week since then, which is great. So yeah. Fakabir says, is there a list of common contractions that could be used to understand when people speak fast and use concatenation and linking? Common contractions.
So there are lists of this. So these like if you look for lists of contractions, you're going to get the official ones, like we're and there and he's. But there are lists of common ones. Sometimes like you can append apostrophe D for did to almost anything. You can append apostrophe S for either belonging to or is to or was to anything. But in terms of like what we were talking about earlier, in terms of how words and sounds blend together, there are lists, but there are so many different situations where this happens, and the different ways they concatenate and link might be different. Honestly, the only way, when I've been learning languages other than English, the only way that I've been able to do this personally is by when people say something more quickly than I can understand, asking them to repeat it more slowly. And then I can piece together, based on what I heard them say, what it was that they said. And that takes a lot of time. Being able to speak a language and being able to understand it, even when people are speaking very informally and very quickly and blurring their words together, takes a lot of time. There's not a shortcut to it. I'm not sure that memorizing a list of 100 different possible blends is going to help you do that. It's just a process that takes time.
Yeah. And I think as you learn some of the more common ones, then you start to understand and recognize other ones as they come up. So yeah, again, I think it goes back to what I was saying to Dev earlier about always trying to find a rule for something, because some people, I said different people learn in different ways, and I think a lot of people's minds work in a very logic way, and they want to know the rules. And I'm like that. I think you maybe are as well, Tony. I think Dev is. But But unfortunately,
But that's not always the most
English.
useful way to
Well,
approach
yeah,
language.
yeah, yeah, and because English is not always logical, and the rules don't always make sense. So
There's always too many rules. It's not that the rules don't
yeah,
always make sense sometimes. Sometimes it's just that there are more rules than it would be efficient for you to understand.
yeah,
And sometimes the rule isn't simple
yeah.
and explanatory. It's like it's whatever sounds best. Well, there's no way to turn that into a list of 1,000 different, a spreadsheet of when this happens, you do this. It's just whatever sounds best, which you pretty much have to like hear it,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Oh,
So I think the same thing applies here for Fakavir's question.
yeah.
But interestingly, though, we're saying, oh, don't worry about the rules. Don't worry about the rules. English isn't logical. However, the course that we've been writing over these last few weeks, as we've been doing these live streams, is going to be called Inside English. It's going to be coming out soon. I'm literally going to be doing some more filming on it tomorrow, um, and
Great.
and the whole point of this course is actually looking at grammar and the tenses and showing how the because this again is something where there's a lot of rules and these things get confusing and students struggle to understand this. And what we're actually saying here is that the rules do make sense, and there are rules, and it is logical. It's not always simple, but it is logical. But there's a lot of things that are sort of thrown on top, a lot of exceptions, a lot of things like contractions are kind of a distraction in when it comes to tenses from the logic behind it. So yeah, you are right to look for rules and to want rules, but sometimes we do have to accept that there aren't rules. Then
I think the difference that we need to be watching for is the rules for a language like English are kind of core to what to the way it works. There are relatively few rules. For instance, we our whole talking about grammar is really based on three
yeah,
rules. One of them is kind of two, but two and one. But still, the rules are simple. They're very broad,
mm,
apply to a lot of different things, and they explain why something works the way it does. What I think doesn't work is when you try to come up with long lists of detailed rules for different situations.
yeah,
Because English, there's a thing about English law compared to law in much of the rest of the world, specifically other European-based cultures. Law in England, in English history, was not so much based on written rules. It was based on tradition, and it was based on court decisions in the past. So history, tradition, and specific history. And this is still the case. In the Canadian Constitution kind of starts off with, and we take into account everything in British legal precedent and tradition. So in Canada, there's literally no law that says why we do a lot of the things that we do, because it just references hundreds of years of legal tradition.
mm,
And so that's what's going on in English. There's not so much defined set laws for everything as there are a set of laws that determine the core
yeah.
principles, and everything else is based on history.
Hmm. So that's
So you can focus in on some core laws,
yes,
core rules about how things work and why they work the way they do. But when you start coming up with all the different lists of when this happens, when this happens, this happens, it ceases to be useful.
yeah.
Sure, you might be able to make an entire list of rules, but you'd never be able to actually memorize that
And
list.
or
It'd be too
use it
long.
in when you're actually
Yeah,
speaking. It would not make your thoughts clearer.
it would
And yeah,
not
that's
would not be
exactly what I was
helpful.
going to say. I was going to say that what we're doing in the course is stripping away those layers that are just add complexity, and just look at the core idea of tenses and what makes them make sense, and what are the rules that always apply, that are always useful, and anything that sort of is only applies in a very small number of situations, we're sort of leaving to one side. And I feel like this is very different to how a lot of English curriculums in textbooks and at schools are structured. And I understand why. Like, for example, you normally start by learning the present simple tense, because you need to say, I am Colin. I am British. I am from England, or whatever. And because it's the most common tense, but it's not the easiest tense, and it has a lot of exceptions. And then obviously, past simple, you change the form of the main verb, but past simple is the only tense where you change the form of the main verb. Well, you do in the continuous as well, but well,
for one specific tense, yeah, it's the only one that has. It's the only tense that has.
It's the only tense
one
where the
form for only that tense. All the other ones have at least 2 or 3, or are used in other situations. Actually, all the other ones are used in other situations.
But what I mean is,
Present simple with the
it's
3
the only tense where you might need to know what tense it is. You need to look at the main verb. It's normally the auxiliary.
Yes.
You can tell what tense it is from the auxiliary verb, and so but it makes us think. It makes students think that the tense. You know what the tense is from the main verb, because we learn about the past simple before we learn about the past or present perfect and all that other tenses, and the past simple has the past simple form of the verb, but other tenses you don't have the past continuous form of a verb because it's the same as the present continuous form of the verb. So it's confusing. So we're trying to look at it from a slightly different angle and look at why that is. And this is why it's actually auxiliary verbs that are far more important than the form of the main verb when trying to understand tenses. Anyway, I think we did have...
So
go on.
It creates 2 problems when you start by looking at the simple tenses. First of all, that becomes the normal to you.
Yeah.
So when you go to the other tenses, they seem to be weird and full of contradictions. But actually, most of the other tenses are much more straightforward and have fewer contradictions. It's the simple tenses that have all the contradictions. But then the second problem is that you learn core rules. You say, okay, I think this is how English works, but it isn't. Those are not the core rules that really exist, that are really explaining why everything else happens.
Mm-hmm. And what I'm, the reason I wanted to do a course like this is because even though I've spoken English is my first language, it's only when I started to teach English, and even had been teaching for quite some time, that I realized how it actually works. It wasn't. It's not something that's sort of natural, but it is logical. There is a logic behind it, and I think people are looking for that logic as we see in the kind of questions that we're getting. It is there. So the course is really designed for people who've maybe gone through a more traditional syllabus and they've got to a certain level, but maybe now they want to come back and just recover those core ideas. But looking at it from a slightly different angle and really getting to the core truth or the core logic that is behind it.
Because we really do think that if you understand those basic rules, like we say, we don't think that lots of complicated rules help most people. They're just going to make it. They're not going to make it easier. They're not going to make you more able to react to a situation. But the core rules do. Yeah. Those basic rules that help you contextualize. They help you see how what you're learning or what you're hearing fits with everything else that you know, and how to respond. What's the kind of the default? What's the basic intent behind most of how English works? That will help you be more confident. It will help you understand new things that you have never heard before, whereas lots of specific rules about specific cases won't.
Yeah. And actually, I don't think we ever refer to them as rules. We don't refer to... No. We do refer to...
We call them big ideas.
Big ideas or core ideas. Yeah. And there's really just 3 of them that we focus on. And then we look at how they apply, how they really do apply consistently in every tense and in every verb and in lots of different situations, or every situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So so let's see. Vakavir Amin says, is there a difference between uncommon and not common, or they can be used, or can they be used? Yeah, the same way for one another. Uncommon and not common. This is I have to think about this.
So one of the issues here is that they're the specifically, and this is going back to what we were talking about with let's see which was it uh, well, I mean anything because there's so many words. Oh, with the different like although and even though. When you have a set of words in English that all mean basically the same thing, but they all mean something slightly different, it's really hard to pin down and explain what the difference is. It's really about in what situations you use these. So part of the problem is that the words for how rare something is really change what they mean based on what kind of community you're kind of talking with. So in one community, rare might be something that you might never see in your lifetime, like bird watching. But in another group, like card collecting, it might be something you might see several times a week. But where you see hundreds and hundreds of things that aren't called rare. So that's part of the problem here, is that depending on who you talk to, uncommon and not common might have like technical differences. But for the most part, they don't really mean anything different. In English, you often see people using the not version of something instead of the prefix un or in to be more emphatic or more poetic. Like someone say, "This is not flammable," or this is not common. So be on the lookout for this or whatever. Whereas if they're not making a big deal out of it, they'll use uncommon or something like that.
Yeah.
But there's not a strong difference between these two.
Right. So to summarize, the meaning can vary in different contexts, but
Yes.
generally speaking, they have the same meaning, although not common can be a little more emphatic sometimes.
I like to say in English that we have synonyms, but we don't have words that mean the same thing.
Yeah,
Every word that means something close is always going to
it's
be
got
used a little bit
yeah,
differently.
it's got a slightly, it's almost like it means the same thing, but it's got a little bit extra meaning. um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, okay, Ahmed says, another question. What is the difference between from now on and from here on out and from here on in? From now on, from here on out, from here on in.
So here on in and here on out, I think that they mean the same thing, but they're all kind of idiomatically used in sort of different situations.
Hmm.
So here on in is frequently used if you have a specific objective. So you'll hear this used in military movies a lot. Like we're advancing into enemy territory, and from here on in, we have to be quiet. Whereas if you're more like you're exploring, you might use here on out, but they don't mean anything technically different. You don't have to technically be going into something or out of something to use one or the other, but sometimes they're used in certain contexts.
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, they all mean from now on.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, they are very, yeah, the same in meaning. Cedra says, hello, this is Cedra from Pakistan. Hello to you. You're very welcome. And the number one's got a lot of another interesting question, which is he says, okay, it's a lot of videos, or lots of video, or lots of videos. Now, I'm going to say these are all correct, but it depends on the context. So, video is a strange word because it can be countable, but it can also be uncountable. So, let's say, like on YouTube, YouTube is a place where videos become countable because they're arranged and put up as individual units. But I'm making videos and I shoot lots of different things, and then I bring them together in my editing software. So in that context, I can talk about video as an uncountable noun, because it's not. I've got lots of different elements which I'm bringing together to make one video, but it won't all end up in the video. So I've got lots of video to edit. So yeah, in that context, I can say lots of video. But you can say lots of videos. There are lots of videos on YouTube, in general. But then if you say a lot of videos, you could also say there are a lot of videos on YouTube. I think maybe a lot of videos and lots of videos, they're very similar. Yeah, they are very similar.
A lot and lots mean the same thing. So you could say a lot of videos or lots of videos or a lot of video or lots of video.
Yeah.
So lots and a lot mean the same. Yeah.
So if you're saying video, lots of video, you're using video as an uncountable noun. And it can be either. Just be careful that it's appropriate to be using it in the uncountable way.
So lots of video would mean like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of video, right? As opposed to lots of different videos.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So
Sidra from Pakistan is asking, what are the basic concepts of morphology of language that we must be aware of as the student of a language? So first of all, we don't emphasize morphology as much as some do. If you want my honest opinion about what do you need to know about morphology, it's that most words have a root, and the root might be the same in different words. It might be very similar. So if you have a bunch of words that all have a part of them that sounds very similar, chances are they have a similar meaning. And then, a lot of words have prefixes, something that's added to it, like un or in. A lot of suffixes that are added to it, like we were talking about apprehension, apprehensive. Those are suffixes. That to me is what you need to know about morphology, is that words are made up of parts. Parts to be looking for are roots, prefixes, and suffixes. Mm-hmm. Other than that, morphology can be studying linguistics, and you're studying how languages work, but they're not terrible, in my opinion, to help you learn a language. I learned morphology actually when I was studying computer science, because we were studying how languages work so that you can break them down, so that you can translate them using a computer, or you can teach a computer to learn a language, or you can create new computer languages, or all these things. We learned how languages work, how the pieces add up, but not in any of the languages I've learned, human languages anyway. It's not super useful. I find it very interesting because I like the history of it, and morphology often tells you the history of a word.
Yeah.
But again, it's not really helping you actually learn the language, except maybe that very basic look for suffixes, prefixes, and roots.
Yeah, I think it comes down to you want to get to these core ideas. You don't need, and I think morphology is much more about the background and the history of things, and the peripheries of the
exactly.
Great.
But things like roots, I cannot tell you how many times I have seen a word in a language I do not know, or at least I don't know that word in that language, and immediately I know like probably 85% of what that word means, like when you would use it, like what it's referring to, because I can look and I can see, well, there's a root. We have that root in English, and maybe that root is also the same in another language I know. Knowing Greek is a real advantage here, because a lot of words get their roots from Greek. So oftentimes I'll see a word, I'm like, there's a Greek root, I know exactly what that means, and here's a suffix that I recognize from another word that I've heard in this language. So what it is. Is it a noun? Is it a adjective? Is it an adverb? And so I can get close enough that I'm not going to use that word perfect more or less what it means quite frequently, not because I'm an expert in morphology, but because I know a lot of roots. And so the more roots and suffixes and prefixes you know, the more words you're going to recognize that you've never seen before. And that is really useful and really cool, especially when you can go someplace where you don't know the language and you can kind of read the signs because you can figure out what the basic gist of some of those words mean.
Yeah, I had a book of, I think it was just called Difficult Words or Complicated Words. And it was kind of like words that you would never, ever hear. But they exist and people have used them.
Right.
Perhaps in sort of very specific academic texts, but they've effectively just invented the word, but based on using some Greek, using some Latin, using the right prefix and the right suffix, and
exactly
to make a word that a lot of people will understand or be able to guess what it means. So yeah. Okay, so Ahmed says, do you guys pronounce the schwa sound the same way? Now, it's interesting you say this.
I'm just going to jump in.
Okay, go on.
I'm just going to jump in here and say there is no official pronunciation of the schwa sound in English. The schwa, again, there's no schwa sound.
Yeah, well, that's what I was
The schwa is the symbol we use. We use the schwa as a symbol to refer to extremely short vowels. It can be an extremely short A, an extremely short E, an extremely short I. It does not matter. It's still going to get a schwa. Now, there is a kind of a default, the most common one, which is the one you'll see on pronunciation charts.
And it also gets referred to as the It also gets referred to as the mid-central vowel, because that's because it's mid-central is kind of like the neutral point, because you're not really doing anything with your lips, your tongue, your mouth at all. It's all just very relaxed, and all the sound is just coming from the throat and the gut.
So it's just kind of the default vowel sound that you are going to be making if you're making such a short vowel sound that you don't really have time to pronounce it out entirely. And so you will get lots of different variations, and it's not based on some of it could be accent, but it's going to be based on what letters are around it, and because it's just going to be what is the easiest way I can get my mouth from this position to this position without reeling a vowel in between. Lots of other languages deal with this differently. In English, we just have one symbol to cover it all.
Yeah, and what we always say about pronunciation is that pronunciation is physical, and
Yes.
everybody has a different shaped head. And so it's always going to be slightly different. It's a very neutral sound. I don't think there's not an American way of saying it or a British way of saying it. That's not how accent works. I think the phonetic sounds, accent maybe uses slightly different phonetic sounds for the same word, but the phonetic sounds are consistent between accents. But that's not to say that they're always exactly the same. There's lots of variation, especially with the vowels. And that's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say I have a kind of slight annoyance when I hear it, the schwa sound. People talking about the schwa sound, because the schwa is not the sound. The schwa is the symbol, and it's called that because that's the name of the letter in Hebrew, which is where the symbol comes from. I think that's right. Is that right, Tony? Is it Hebrew or?
No, that's definitely not a symbol in Hebrew.
Where did I get that from?
The symbol for schwa is like an upside down E, right?
Yeah. What's that from?
Sounds.
Anyway, the schwa is referring to the symbol, not to the sound it makes. The sound is obviously completely different. But anyway,
Yes, completely.
that's just a pet peeve of mine.
Yes.
Yeah, I hope that's helpful. So it's time has flown by this week, which means we're all having fun, which is great. So if you are watching, make sure you give us a thumbs up. It does really help. I do really appreciate it. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you're also subscribed and click the bell for notifications so that you will see when we go live again or when we upload a video. We will have some more videos coming soon, and we will be doing some more of these live streams. So, yeah, we've got a couple more questions coming in. Should we save these for next week, Tony? Or should we... Yeah, I think we're going to have to go now. But Instadead and Alex Hyun, you're going to have to tune in next week. What we'll do is we will answer your questions in next week's live stream. So thank you for watching, and we will see you next week.